Welcome back. A North Carolina icon essentially erased from history, now revived by a recent book written about his fight for freedom and equality. Here is the story of Senator Abraham Galloway.
But this is Galloway. He's 19 or 20 then, and he has just escaped from slavery.
David Ciesielski is a historian and a storyteller. Stories that he heard all his life inspired him to write this book, The Fire of Freedom, Abraham Galloway and the Slave Civil War.
People have compared Galloway to sort of a mix of, my favorite was somebody who said he was a mix of Malcolm X and James Bond.
Galloway was fearless. He escaped from slavery in the 1850s, and during the Civil War, he repeatedly put his life on the line and served the Union as a spy.
He's working behind enemy lines all the way from the Chesapeake Bay to the Mississippi River, as well as on the North Carolina coast.
In 1864, Galloway led a delegation of formerly enslaved men to meet with another man named Abraham, the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Galloway demanded the rights of citizenship.
He was all fire. He wanted full equality. He wanted no compromise. He didn't want to wait. He wanted it now.
After the war, Galloway was one of 3 African Americans elected to the North Carolina State Senate. He was effective in the General Assembly and would not be intimidated.
He was jaunty. He wore pistols in his belt even in the General Assembly.
A newspaper article at the time said Galloway laughed loud and often. Sadly, this man full of fire and courage died in 1870 at the age of 33. Ciesielski said 6,000 people attended his funeral in Wilmington, at the time the largest in the state's history.
I do feel like we should all be very, very proud of having Abraham Galloway as part of our North Carolina history. He's the very best of us.
For Capitol Tonight, I'm David Ivey.
Senator Galloway was buried in Pine Forest, but sadly his grave marker has disappeared. The author says when Senator Galloway would make speeches, Frederick Douglass, the famed orator and civil rights advocate, often introduced him. Last weekend marked Senator Galloway's 188th birthday. Joining us now for more on his legacy are 2 current state lawmakers, Representative Brian Echeverria, a Republican from Cabarrus County, and Representative Dante Pittman, a Democrat from Wilson County. This legacy is important still today, right?
It's super important to me. You know, what's interesting is when I hear his story as one of the first black legislators in North Carolina and hear about his bravery, I think we all have inside of us the willingness to fight for our own freedom. But his willingness to sacrifice it all, lay it down again for the freedom of others is probably the thing that moved me the most.
Well, you're talking about someone whose shoes are just impossible to fill, but we're so fortunate because without him, I feel confident in saying we wouldn't be here. It takes giants and leaders of that stature that have come before us, that have paved the way, and it's why we have so many folks in the legislature now that are able to advocate for all of their constituents, not just one group of people.
Correct.
And Representative Pittman, what about the importance of what we're doing right now, sort of, telling these stories and keeping these stories alive?
Well, it's really important, and I oftentimes have conversations with folks from my generation. We can't afford to lose these stories, because when we lose these stories, we lose the context of the things that came before us. And as we're going forward here in the state of North Carolina and trying to build the best state that we can, in which everyone has an opportunity and no group of people is left out, we have to understand the fights that came before us.
Representative Echeverria, I watched you while we were doing this, and you were nodding your head and laughing about some of the stuff that he did. It sounded like he was quite a character.
Yes.
And there's been plenty of those in our time. What do you think stood out to you about that story you just saw and about him?
The willingness to come back. I mean, the willingness to come back is probably the most impressive thing, because that's the selfless act. He was free in the North. He doesn't just come back as a spy. He actually comes back and he fights for the rights of the people who are now free and works his way into the legislative branch. And for me, it's really important because here's a fun trivia question in another 30 years. I'm the first black man to represent Cabarrus County in the state legislature. I didn't realize that until Black History Month started to approach, right? You start to look into things and hearing
Do you feel
his
responsibility with that?
Yeah, not an additional responsibility. I love people, man. I mean, I think that people are amazing. God loves people. And every single person, even my colleagues, who are across the aisle, I mean, they're unique, you know, and so I didn't need anything to say, hey, man, let's do right by people. So I don't feel an extra responsibility, but I could tell you that my family, the way it's built, I come from a very diverse family. Like, everybody reminds me of someone that I love already. And for me, that really works out in the legislature.
Representative Pittman, how about you and your own background? How does that impact you and when you think about, you know, serving down on Jones Street as well?
Well, I look at it as I have the distinct privilege of getting to serve in the legislature. But, you know, I share this with Brian that I have a very diverse family myself. And when I think back, you know, growing up, that we had folks coming together to make sure that kids like me had an opportunity. It wasn't just, you know, you stay in your lane and folks just divided themselves all the time. And I think that's something that we need to continue doing in our communities. So I feel a great and distinct privilege to be able to be serving. But one of the things I really feel we've got to do is we got to make sure that we keep talking to one another and that we keep the conversation going even when we don't agree. That's one of the things about Senator Galloway that sticks out to me is that he was not afraid to tackle an issue head on. And we've got to make sure we are doing that we're speaking our points of view in a respectful way, but we're standing firm.
Yes.
Brian, you know, we are in a different era of politics today in a lot of ways. I mean, there were problems back then, there were problems in the 60s, and now's a really partisan kind of era.
Yes.
You know, there's talk of DEI and all this other stuff going on. How do you feel about that about how race is playing a role in politics today?
Man, I think, how about we not discriminate ever, right? You know, that for me, when I think about what we've overcome as a nation, whether you're talking Rosewood, Axe Handle Day down in Jacksonville, slavery, civil rights abuses, we've gone through a lot and remedied a lot to get here today, for me to sit in this seat. So now looking forward, how do we make sure that none of those things repeat itself against anyone, right? So I think when you talk about DEI, I'm like, hey, how about no one? You don't discriminate against anyone. And let's try that on for a generation. What's interesting is my daughter, her children will be the first generation in U.S. history to not know or love someone who perpetuated or suffered slavery or civil rights abuses. They are the clean slate generation. Everything we've gone through is going to be a story in a history book. And I do feel a responsibility on behalf of all of those children to make sure that it remains just the story in a history book.
President Pittman, how about you and sort of the role of race in politics in this era and as we talked about for your generation moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you, I have the honor of representing a rural county in eastern North Carolina. And one of the advantages that comes with that is having access to folks who lived this history, folks that are still with us, that know where we've come from. And one of the things that I firmly believe in and I'm trying to lead on is to make sure we learn those lessons because we cannot afford to go back. And if we don't understand and we don't know why we have some of the protections in place that we do, then we are at risk of going backwards, sometimes not even knowing it. So I think that we've got to make sure that we are listening to those elders that came before us, that fought the good fight and are still believing in the future and take that knowledge so we don't make the same mistakes again.
Fun conversation of talking about some incredible history, talking with the new generation of lawmakers too. Good to see you both. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. As always, if it's on Jones Street or Main Street, you'll find it right here in Capitol tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here on Monday night.